Today on America's Test Kitchen, Bridget uncovers the secrets to the perfect crispy skinned chicken breasts. Jack challenges Chris to a tasting of jasmine rice, and Julia cooks rice and pasta pilaf right here on America's Test Kitchen.
People often ask us where we get our ideas. Very often we get our ideas from great restaurants like the one we're in today. We're here at Mylino, next to Gramercy Park in Manhattan, and I was here a few months ago and had a chicken dish that was so incredible that we decided we would have to try to make one somewhat like it. So we're here today with Chef Nick Anderer, and we're going to talk about this dish, which is called Pollo alla Diavolo, right?
Pollo alla Diavolo.
Pollo alla Diavolo. And where did this dish come from?
So it's kind of a cross between two different sources of inspiration. One was in Rome,
Right.
where I spent a lot of time as a student and as a cook, and they do a simple peppered chicken out there that they call pollo alla diavola. It's basically just a peppered chicken, not much sauce to speak of. And then on the way back to New York, I went to this restaurant called Rayo's, where they do a chicken scarpaiello that's pretty famous. And I love the sauce and the way that it had this tang to it and spice. So I figured we can combine the two and make a dish that is unique to us.
This is a half chicken, but
Yeah.
this does not look like a half chicken.
No, so that's an important part of the process, is getting that butchering right. So we debone an entire half chicken and just leave that one little wing bone in there, just so we have something to sort of grasp onto as it's in the pan, spin it around. But yeah, deboning the half chicken and having it pressed flat so that the entire piece of an animal, which is usually oblong and doesn't have consistency to it, becomes more consistent in the pan, cooks evenly, gets that nice crisp skin too.
Yeah, the skin is amazing. Well, can we eat it?
Absolutely.
Let's try it. It's incredible. So good. It's got that amazing shattering crisp skin, the tender meat, and the piquancy of the sauce is perfect.
There's some pickled cherry pepper in there.
Pickled
There's
cherry.
the liquid that we use to pickle the cherry peppers, a little tomato paste, some reduced chicken stock, and a lot of olive oil.
Right. Thank you, Chef. This was great. Thanks for spending the time with us.
Absolutely. It's great having you back at Mylino.
And now, let's go back to the test kitchen and see if we can make something like this at home.
So I have two annoying things to say.
Just two.
Just two. First of all is when I do chicken breasts at home, they end up like this. Dry and chalky on the inside and the skin's a disaster.
It's like rubber.
The other thing is we send our intrepid reporter, Doc Willoughby, to New York. He gets to eat at these fabulous restaurants and then says, can you make this back in the kitchen? Somebody's got the wrong job description. I think
nice
it's me.
life. Yeah.
So here's what I get stuck with. Now, I've actually eaten that chicken at Mylino, and it is incredibly crisp. I've never had it like that.
Yeah, well, that's what we're going to duplicate here, but instead of using a half chicken, we're going with bone-in, skin-on chicken breasts. And the first thing that we want to do is remove the bone, and that's going to make it much easier for us to pound it out later so it's a nice even size. So we're starting here at this thicker end, and I've got my ribs facing away from the knife. And you can see this line right here. That's where we're going to start to put the knife in. And you just want to make shallow little cuts at first, hugging the knife against the bone. And as you pull away the bone, you can really see in there, and just make these shallow little cuts. Boning knife is perfect because it's slightly flexible. It's going to get in under the bone, and it's going to leave as much meat on the chicken as possible. Now, when you get to this end here, it's still attached. You're going to have a little bit of the wishbone. Well, this one's actually coming off quite easily. But you can see that the wishbone right there, you also want to release that. So we've got this nice breast here. This is the chicken tenderloin. We just want to remove that. That actually comes off very easily. And you can save that for something like stir fry. And then finally, you see this glob of fat here? You want to get rid of any of that fat or skin that's overhanging the chicken. All right, so we've got this nice boneless now, skin-on chicken breast. And we'll go ahead and do the second one exactly the same way, starting at the thicker end and moving our way towards the ribs. So here's that little wishbone there. Just release it from the meat. Find the tenderloin. We want to get rid of that. And finally, any overhanging skin and fat. And we've got our two boneless skin-on chicken breasts. So we're going to take the tip of our knife and poke it through the skin and just right into the meat, about 30-40 times on the skin side, so that our salt can work its way into the meat. This is also going to help that fat to render out as it cooks. And then on the second side, on this fatter end, just 5-6 times should do it. Cover them with plastic. Next, we need to pound these so that they are about a 1/2 inch thick all the way across. And because this is already pretty tender, you don't really need to pound too hard. And lastly, we're going to season this, a half a teaspoon of kosher salt on each breast. And that's going to quickly work its way into that meat.
Why are we not brining them? Is the salt doing the same thing, or?
It is, but there is one big difference. Brining, soaking the chicken in water and salt, adds water to not only the meat but also the skin. Now, since we're trying to crisp the skin and get it really dry, that's imperative before we cook
So
it.
don't add any
the
more.
brining would not be a good idea. So salting does the same thing. It just takes a little bit of time for that salt to work its way through. So finally, we need to put this on a rack that's set over a rimmed baking sheet. I'm putting the skin side up. I want to make sure that that skin covers the meat as much as possible. And then I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap, and we'll put this in the fridge for at least 1 hour, but you can do this up to 8 hours in advance. All right, Chris, it's time to cook the chicken. We're going to start developing that really crispy skin. And the first thing that I want to do is take some paper towels and blot away any moisture that's on the surface of the chicken. Because if the chicken goes into the pan while it's still moist, it actually lowers the temperature of the pan and the oil that we're cooking it in, so you get steam.
So pat chicken breast dry before putting in pan actually makes sense.
That's right. So next up, this is black pepper, a 1/4 teaspoon per chicken breast. And then we're going to start with our pan. This is 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil, 12-inch skillet. And I want to swirl this oil to coat the pan, but the pan is completely cold. See, I'm touching it with my hand. But this is key. We're going to start the chicken in a cold pan, in cold oil, skin side down.
You can't do this. We've sat here for 15 years telling people to preheat the pan with the oil in the pan until it just starts to smoke. And now what are you doing?
Well, this is going to help solve the problem of the skin taking longer to cook than the actual chicken meat. Now we're going to turn the flame to medium. So it's going to give time for that skin to start rendering. It's kind of like bacon. Think about bacon. You put bacon into a cold pan to start that nice slow rendering. And this way we don't get any pockets of fat. If the chicken went into preheated oil, a preheated pan, we would get some nice crispy areas, but we would get some of those pockets of fat. So we want good rendering. Now, to ensure that all of the skin stays in contact with the pan and it doesn't shrink, we're going to weigh this down with a Dutch oven. So the skin stays in contact with the pan. It's going to get really nice and rendered. It's going to stay here for about 7 to 9 minutes until the edges of the chicken start to turn opaque and the skin starts to brown.
You know, one of the questions we had for this recipe was how come it's so hard to get chicken skin crispy? Well, it only crisps up when the proteins in the chicken form like rungs on a ladder. They connect, they become rigid, and they become very crispy. But there are 2 things in chicken skin that prevent that. One is water. About half of chicken skin is water. And the water prevents you getting a nice high temperature, which is necessary for the proteins to combine. So therefore, you have to get rid of the water before that happens. The second thing is that there's about 1/3 of the chicken skin is fat. So you need enough heat to render that fat and get the fat out, because the fat inhibits the proteins from getting together. So get rid of the water, render some of that fat out, and finally the proteins get together and you get a nice crispy skin.
All right, so let's give a peek to that chicken, see if it's nice and brown. You can see that it's just starting to color there, right? So we're going to leave this in there another 6-7 minutes until the skin is really brown. But this time we're leaving the pot off because it trapped that steam in there. We want the steam to release so the skin can get really nice and crisp. So in the meantime, we can work on a couple of ingredients for our pan sauce. And we need a 1/4 cup of chopped hot cherry peppers. Very tasty. It's got that nice brine. All right, so I'm just going to get rid of the seeds. So we'll just chop this. This really brightens the dish. It gives it that nice pickly brine. All right, so that looks great. And now, 1 shallot. We're going to mince this pretty fine. Shallots are obviously very small, so we're going to make really shallow cuts horizontally and then across. All right, so I'll just do the same with the second half of the shallot, and then we can move on to making the pan sauce and finishing the chicken. All right, Chris, let's take a look at that skin. Look at that. It's beautiful. It's bronzed. It's really well rendered. We're going to let this cook on the second side just for a couple of minutes. All right, so that second side's got some nice color. All right, beautiful. All right, so it's time to take these out of the pan. And we're going to let these rest uncovered. We don't want to tent them with foil because, again, that will cause steam and you won't get that nice crisp skin. So I want to pour off the fat, and we'll go ahead and return 2 teaspoons back to the pan because we're going to start to make our pan sauce. You don't want the pan to be too hot. There's some residual heat in there. But a nice temperate heat is going to allow the shallots here to soften without burning too quickly. All right, so we can see that the shallots have got a little bit of nice color. They're softened. So we're going to add our next ingredient, and that is a teaspoon of all-purpose flour. It's just a tiny bit of flour, really to give the sauce some nice body in there. But it's not so much that it's going to make it taste like a gravy. So we'll go ahead and stir the flour for about 30 seconds because we want to cook off any of that raw flour taste. I'm going to call that 30 seconds. It's time to deglaze the pan. Now we're using some of that hot cherry pepper brine. This is a 1/4 cup.
That's the stuff from the bottle.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And a 1/2 cup of chicken stock. And then we want to scrape up any of those brown bits. Oh, you can smell that brine. It's sweet and sour and seasoned. And we just want to let this simmer until it starts to thicken, and that's only going to take a couple of minutes. All right, our sauce is beautifully thickened, and at this point, I just want to see if there's any juices from the chicken that need to go back into the pan. There's usually not too much. And we'll let that cook for another 30 seconds or so. All right, let's finish it up. It's a tablespoon of cold unsalted butter, and I've got the heat off. Just going to whisk that in. And that butter, because it's cold, it emulsifies the sauce. If we were to use really warm butter or do this directly over heat, it would actually start to split and you get a really greasy sauce. All right, with the butter almost all in, we'll go ahead and add a teaspoon of fresh thyme. And of course, we can't forget the cherry hot peppers. It was a 1/4 cup. This looks great. Our sauce is just perfect. All right, let's finish off these plates with some of this beautiful sauce. And I'm going to place the sauce around the chicken, not on top of the skin, because again, we don't want it to get soggy.
This is my favorite moment in the test kitchen.
It
You've
is.
worked hard to cook for me, and I'm about to taste it.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. The skin is so thin. Now we know why chickens have skin. So we can eat it.
And it's perfect with that sauce. Really bright.
I'm glad I came to the kitchen today.
I'm glad you did too.
Boy, is that good. So the secret to great crispy skin chicken breast is to start with skin on bone and breast. Take the bone out, pound them flat, salt them, put them in the fridge for up to 8 hours. Then you started them in a cold pan with some oil, skin side down with some weight, a Dutch oven on top. For the first half of cooking time, took it off to finish. And then finally, we made a great pan sauce. So there you have it from America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen. A great recipe, actually the best recipe we've ever had for a crispy skinned chicken breast. I have to admit I'm basically a basmati rice kind of guy, but a year ago I bought a bag of jasmine rice and it actually did have a nice flavor. But the first question I have is before we do a tasting is, I don't even know, what is jasmine rice? They throw some jasmine flavor on basic white rice, or does it naturally have that nice floral flavor?
It is a natural product.
Okay.
So we have 3 samples here, Chris. These have all been steamed, very plain. Jasmine rice is an aromatic variety of long grain white rice. It is related to basmati rice, but it is grown in Southeast Asia. 2 things. One, it has the same compound. It is called 2-acetyl-1-pyrroline.
Oh yeah, I knew that.
Yes.